What criminal committed an almost perfect crime, and what was the thing that messed it up? Salim Kara, who single-handedly stole 2.3 million in coins, one by one. He kept a low profile for 13 years, but blew it by buying a $1 million house in the early 90s. The Dunbar armored robbery, the largest cash heist in US history, a 6-man inside job to rob an armored cash depot. They set up a house party as an alibi, used the keys to get into the cafeteria, and waited in there until all employees came in on break, then ambushed and subdued them without firing a shot or raising an alarm. They then loaded the money bags with over $18 million into a U-Haul, destroyed the CCTV tapes, and returned to the party. Then they sat on the money for 6 months before hiring a crooked lawyer to set up a real estate money laundering scheme to avoid suspicion. 2 years after the robbery, one of the men paid a real estate broker with a stack of money still wrapped in the original currency strap. The broker immediately reported it to the police. After being arrested, he cracked under interrogation, confessed to the robbery, and ratted out his partners. That one dude who robbed a bank by hiring a bunch of people from Craigslist to show up wearing the same outfit he was and wait outside, he would have gotten away. But a homeless man saw him do a practice run the day before and after the robbery told the police. John George Hay killed up to 6 people between 1944 and 1949 by either clubbing or shooting his victims, and then disposed of their bodies by dissolving them in concentrated sulfuric acid. He would then fraudulently sell their assets, properties, etc., and pocket the cash. His workshop contained no drainage, so he simply poured the remains on a pile of rubble. His last victim, an elderly victim, disappeared, and 2 days later he accompanied the victim's friend to the police station, where police discovered his history of fraud. At his workshop, the police found papers concerning his earlier victims and dry cleaning, jewelry tickets for his last victim. A pathologist examining the human remains found parts of a pelvis, gallstones, and dentures on the rubble. Hay then claimed he had killed his last victim, destroying the body in acid, and completely misunderstanding the legal term of corpus delicti, claimed that he could not be charged as there was no body to determine a crime had taken place. The man went to the gallows. The Antwerp diamond heist, the perfect heist of the century, where an Italian gang stole 100 million in gems. While leaving Antwerp, they disposed of the disguises and the tools used, but one member of the gang was too lazy to burn everything as instructed. Among the rubbish, the police found envelopes of the Antwerp Diamond Center and a receipt for a sandwich bought at a store close to the center. They recovered video footage of the sandwich store and busted the mastermind of the heist, who didn't give up his mates, but some were later identified. Some of the stolen diamonds are still unaccounted for. Wolfgang Beltraki, he made millions with forged paintings he painted all himself. He was ultimately caught because he once accidentally used paint that contained a very slight amount of a substance that wasn't used in the days of the original painter. Robert Durst. He was caught while being interviewed for an HBO series, to which he initially agreed on to clear his name, went to bathroom and mumbled to microphone, which he thought was off. "What the hell did I do? Kill all of them, of course." This was later presented to the court as evidence. You can still watch it on HBO. That Australian kid who hacked the FBI and put his photos on their website. He scrubbed the metadata from the photo so it wouldn't show the GPS location. Then he accidentally uploaded the original with that information still on it. I worked in the federal prison system. Met a man in his mid-30s who was serving time for a series of bank robberies. His arrest was a complete surprise in his area. Model citizen. Married, young kids, volunteered, and gave generously to his kids' school. His bank robberies were intricately planned and well-timed. One of his underlings decided to open up his own bank robbing business. He wasn't as smart and ratted out our man when he was caught as part of his plea deal. The guy who created the Silk Road gave himself away by initially introducing the Silk Road to the world from an email address that would ultimately lead investigators right to him. I knew a guy who got into selling drugs on the dark web. He had this setup where he'd buy the drugs and package them in his room, ship them through USPS, and collect money through cryptocurrency. He made a lot of money, went on for a while without being caught, They even found fictionalized accounts he wrote about how he was able to do this, including driving 50 miles to make drops. He was caught when an employee noticed he was handling large numbers of small envelopes while wearing latex gloves and reported it. He probably would have gotten away with it if he'd worn winter gloves over the latex. Knightsbridge robbery. The boss of the gang cut himself while breaking into the lockboxes and, in the dark, found out too late there was blood all around the place, too much to clean up. He nevertheless managed to get away with $60 million and hide somewhere in South America, but at some point decided to go back to England to retrieve his Ferrari, being arrested in the process. There's the story of Daniel Rigmaiden. He was a scam artist who defrauded the government out of hundreds of thousands in tax money. He was eventually caught, but was so confident that his methods of avoiding capture were thorough that he thought law enforcement had to have been cheating in some way, abusing power. When caught, he turned whistleblower. This kid was smart. Per documentary IMDb, he evades the FBI for months. Once captured, he uses his time, then in prison, to investigate. His obsessive search for the truth leads to a groundbreaking discovery. Law enforcement used a secret technology called a stingray to intercept his phone calls and personal information, as well as those of millions of unsuspecting Americans. He takes his discovery public, and the revelation not only carries implications for his case, but also for the fate of the Fourth Amendment. The stingrays are cell site simulators, or IMSI catchers, invasive cell phone surveillance devices that mimic cell phone towers and send out signals to trick cell phones in the area into transmitting their locations and identifying information. When used to track a suspect's cell phone, they also gather information about the phones of countless bystanders who happen to be nearby, as a law enforcement can literally drive down any block with one turned on, having it connect to every single mobile device as it moves down the street. Mobile cell towers essentially gathering your information without your knowledge. The Friday night bank robber was the most prolific bank robber in US history. I believe he had a master's degree in something analytical like math. Was a martial arts instructor. He figured out there's a time of the year in the Northeast where it would be dark out just before the banks closed. He used motorcycles to drive through the woods to these banks and rode it back through the woods to a U-Haul truck he had waiting, and would put the bike into the truck and drive away calmly. He did this for a long time, kind of like the robbers in the movie Point Break. He would stop for the rest of the year, which had the police really guessing. They couldn't figure out patterns for a long time. Years later, the police started to catch on with his idea of doing it on Friday nights in the Northeast, and from video knew he was probably into martial arts, but that doesn't exactly narrow it down. Dumb luck, some random kid stumbled upon his buried cache of things like a gun, gloves, mask, cash, etc. in the woods. They turned it over to the cops, and that's how they ended up finding out who he was. The FBI gave him some deal where he worked with them and banks on telling them how to prevent bank robberies. In 1995, Mark Winger of Springfield, Illinois, wanted to kill his wife Donna, ERC, so he could carry on an affair, and the perfect scenario came. A week before her death, Roger Harrington was her shuttle driver on the way home from the St. Louis airport, and he reportedly spoke about always getting high and having orgies. In turn, the Wingers complained to the shuttle company. Then, Mark calls the police claiming that he shot Roger after he caught him attacking Donna. Despite the contradiction of Roger being shot in a way that Mark did not claim happened, the case was shut, and Mark was viewed as a hero for killing the man who killed his wife. However, in his infinite wisdom, Mark wouldn't stop asking the police about the case, despite it being ruled as closed. Also, he tried to sue the shuttle company for Roger's alleged action, to which the company started their own investigation, which showed that the events couldn't have gone the way Mark described. The final nail came when his affair partner came forward to the police and described their affair, which led to further re-examination of evidence that showed it was staged. Mark was later tried and convicted in 2002 and sentenced to life without parole. In another derp moment from Mark, he was later given an extra 35 years for trying to solicit the murder of his affair partner and his rich friend who refused to bail him out from behind bars. The main piece of evidence being a 19-page handwritten plan for how he wanted the murders to be carried out. the serial arsonist that caused like 90% of LA County's fire. He worked for the fire department. One of his fires were ruled as an accidental electrical fire and he insisted it wasn't. Someone robbed a bank a few minutes from my house and fled on a bicycle. He was in and out quickly enough that cops weren't on the scene until he had ditched the bike in the neighborhood. He had concealed his identity enough during the robbery that all the police had to go on is a male riding a bicycle carrying a parcel in the vicinity of this neighborhood. He had made it to a truck he had parked in the neighborhood without being noticed by anyone. The police had little idea what to look for, and by all measure, he had made the perfect getaway. All he had to do was drive home. While attempting to leave the neighborhood in his truck, he saw a police vehicle making a patrol, and in a panic, he drove his truck straight into a utility pole. The patrolling officer saw this, went to check on him, and found the stolen money in his truck. Ariel Castro gained international attention for abducting, brutalizing, and keeping 3 girls in his house for over 11 years. This was before he forgot the door unlocked one time when he left the house, and Amanda Berry was finally able to run out and use a stranger's phone to dial 911. That's quite a bad enough story, and I could have easily stopped there and still had one of the most disturbing posts on this submission. But the investigation also found that his next-door neighbor had abducted a girl back in the early 90s, and he still had her remains buried in his basement. He might have never been caught, and that girl would have still been a missing person cold case if Amanda Berry was never able to make that phone call. The United California Bank robbery of 1972. The 6 perpetrators had rented a vacation home to use as a base, and cleaned it top to bottom before leaving. Except they forgot to start the dishwasher before they left, and police were able to match all of their fingerprints off the dirty dishes. I work in downtown Chicago. Last year, one guy robbed the Fifth Third Bank across the street. He escaped into the Ogilvy Transportation Center and disappeared into the night despite it being so crowded and busy. Got away with the money and everything. Until 3 weeks later, when a woman recognized him as having flirted with her right before he robbed the bank and had given her his phone number, she handed that over to the authorities and he was successfully caught. Bro, he was so close to getting away with it? Harold Shipman, seemingly a normal GP, turns out to be a prolific serial killer with maybe up to 250 victims over his career. Only discovered when a hospital worker was concerned about the number of cremation forms they had to process for his elderly patients.